They said it wasn't wrong, but when every glance, every touch, and every shared silence makes my heart race, I'm not so sure anymore. The first time I noticed her, it wasn't dramatic. She didn't walk in like a movie scene or drop something just to give me an excuse to help. She simply existed, and somehow, in that quiet presence, the world around me slowed. It was a mid-morning Saturday at the small cafe tucked between old bookstores, the kind of place where the sunlight filters lazily through tall windows, dust motes drifting like tiny lanterns in the air. The smell of fresh coffee and warm pastries mixed with something uniquely her, an understated perfume, subtle, like lavender caught in sunlight. I was nursing my usual cappuccino, staring at my laptop but not really reading anything. And then she appeared, graceful in a way that didn't demand attention but somehow commanded it anyway. She carried a hardcover book in one hand, a reusable coffee cup in the other. Her hair, loosely tied back, had a few strands rebelliously framing her face, catching the light just so. Something about the calm assurance in her movements made me pause. We ended up at neighboring tables. A casual, "Good morning," passed between us, short, polite, but there was something in her eyes that lingered, that made me feel seen. I noticed how she would occasionally tuck a stray lock of hair behind her ear, her fingers brushing lightly against her cheek. My gaze caught the subtle warmth in her smile, the quiet way she settled into her space, as if she belonged to some rhythm I didn't yet understand. It wasn't just physical, though I couldn't deny the pull, but the way she carried herself hinted at a life fully lived, full of stories I couldn't yet imagine. I, in contrast, felt like an unfinished sentence, fumbling through my early 20s with questions I rarely voiced. And yet, in the simple act of sitting near her, I felt an unexpected steadiness, as if just sharing the same sunlight could make the world feel less jagged. At one point, her hand brushed the edge of the table near mine. It was incidental, I'm sure, but I felt the faint warmth of her skin, and my chest tightened with that odd combination of thrill and hesitation. My mind raced. Why am I noticing this? Why does a simple touch feel like a conversation? She laughed at something her phone displayed, soft and unforced, and I realized I'd been holding my breath without knowing it. There was no urgency, no dramatics, only the slow, quiet building of curiosity. I wanted to know her story, but I also feared my own boldness in imagining she might care to share it. By the time she left, carrying her book under one arm and the faint scent of coffee and lavender trailing behind, I realized something had shifted. I had noticed her in a way I hadn't noticed anyone before, attuned to the smallest gestures, the subtle pauses in speech, the way she smiled at the world. And somewhere in that quiet awareness, a seed had planted itself, a soft, hesitant curiosity, the kind that can grow into something more if given time and attention. I didn't know her name yet. But already, the thought of seeing her again felt like a small heartbeat inside my chest, slow but insistent, demanding acknowledgement. After that first morning at the cafe, it wasn't long before our paths crossed again. Not by design, but by some quiet gravity that neither of us could name. I began to notice her at the library, tucked between shelves that smelled of old paper and polished wood, flipping through books with a careful, deliberate rhythm. Or at the little park near my apartment, reading under the broad shade of an oak tree, sunlight dappled across her face. Each time, the world seemed to slow just a fraction when she was near. We started exchanging small greetings. Hello? Morning, and each word felt weighted with something unspoken. The first few times, I stumbled over my own awkwardness, noticing the soft curve of her smile and the way her eyes lit up, just enough to make my chest tighten. I found myself anticipating those brief encounters, replaying them in my mind, wondering if I had lingered too long in her gaze or laughed too loudly at a joke that wasn't that funny. Our interactions began to stretch, almost imperceptibly, into conversations. A comment on a book she was reading. A shared complaint about the cafe's stubborn Wi-Fi. And gradually, familiarity crept in, softening the edges of our initial curiosity into something warmer. I started to notice the subtler things, the way her fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup when she was thinking, the light tilt of her head when she laughed, the quiet confidence in the way she moved through space. Each small gesture felt intimate, as if I was learning a language she hadn't spoken aloud. One afternoon, while we waited together at a crosswalk, her shoulder brushed mine as the crowd pressed closer, and I felt an unexpected jolt of warmth. It wasn't startling or invasive, it was gentle, almost accidental, but it carried a quiet electricity that neither of us acknowledged verbally. Later, as we walked a few steps side by side, she told me a story from her childhood, her voice soft but vivid, and I realized I was leaning slightly closer, drawn into the world she was sharing. The subtle intimacy of shared stories, of laughter that lingered a beat too long, was becoming our quiet ritual. There was a sense of ease growing between us, a rhythm of companionship that didn't require forced words. I found myself looking forward to moments where our worlds overlapped. The accidental meeting in the bookstore, the shared bench at the park, even standing in line at the cafe and exchanging playful commentary on the pastries. Each encounter was punctuated by small touches, her hand briefly resting near mine when handing over a borrowed pen, our knees brushing lightly when we both bent down to tie shoes on the sidewalk. Each gesture, minor on the surface, carried a weight of familiarity and comfort that I couldn't ignore. And yet, beneath it all, a tension lingered, gentle, almost shy. I was conscious of the age difference, of the quiet hesitation in our prolonged glances, and of the unspoken question, "Is this allowed?" Despite the doubt, I couldn't deny the warmth that spread through me every time she smiled, every time her presence lingered longer than necessity dictated. The subtle magnetic pull between us was undeniable, shaping our shared spaces into moments of quiet, delicate intimacy. By the time I left our meeting that day, I realized the effect she had on me was no longer fleeting curiosity. It was a steady, insistent draw, one that threaded itself into the rhythms of my daily life. I wanted to know her more, and I found myself hoping that she, too, felt the quiet gravity of these repeated, accidental collisions of our worlds. It was one of those quiet evenings when the city felt softened by the dim glow of streetlights, the kind of night where the air carries a gentle hush. I found myself walking past the little park where she often sat, and there she was, book in hand, yet not reading. She seemed, smaller somehow, lost in thought. I hesitated, then moved closer, unsure why I felt compelled to sit near her, to fill the empty space beside her with my presence. She looked up, surprised but not displeased. Her smile was softer than usual, tinged with something I couldn't name. For a moment, we sat in companionable silence, letting the world go on around us. The faint scent of her perfume mixed with the cool evening air, and I noticed a slight tremor in her hands as she held her cup of tea. I realized she was nervous, or maybe just weighed down by something unspoken. "I haven't really had anyone to talk to lately," she said finally, her voice quiet, almost hesitant. "Life feels a little heavier than usual." I nodded, unsure what to say, but wanting her to know she could trust me. "I get that," I said softly. "Some days it's like the weight is just there, whether you want it or not." Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, there was no subtlety, no playful teasing. Just honesty. And in that honesty, a fragile bridge formed between us. She spoke of her loneliness, how friendships had shifted, how she sometimes felt overlooked despite her confidence, how the years had carried experiences that weren't always easy to share. I listened, captivated not just by her words but by the vulnerability in the small tremor of her lips, the way she hugged her tea closer as if seeking warmth, the quiet pause after each sentence, as if inviting me to stay with her in that space. I told her, hesitantly at first, about my own insecurities, how my 20s often felt like fumbling through shadows, trying to define who I was, feeling unmoored in the midst of constant change. Sharing these fragments of myself was terrifying, yet liberating, especially under the soft glow of the park lamps. The brush of her knee against mine felt accidental, yet it sent a shiver of reassurance through me. For a moment, we simply existed in that shared vulnerability, hands occasionally brushing, shoulders leaning toward one another, breaths sinking in a quiet rhythm. There was no rush, no expectation, just the human comfort of being understood, of being seen. I realized then that this was the moment where curiosity transformed into something deeper, empathy, connection, trust. By the time we stood to leave, the world had shifted slightly. The air between us was charged, not with urgency or desire, but with the quiet affirmation that we were not alone in our fears or our longing. Our hands brushed lightly as she adjusted her bag strap, and I felt the warmth linger longer than necessary, a small, unspoken acknowledgement of the bond forming between us. Walking away, I couldn't help but glance back. She returned my look, her eyes soft, luminous with gratitude and quiet amusement. I realized that for the first time, I wasn't just drawn to her presence, I was drawn to her essence, the mixture of strength and fragility that made her undeniably human, undeniably magnetic. And I knew that from this moment on, nothing between us would ever be quite the same. By now, our encounters had become a rhythm, small yet significant. There was a quiet comfort in seeing her, but with comfort came an unexpected tension, one that lingered just beneath the surface. It was the kind of tension that made my chest tighten for reasons I couldn't fully articulate, a tension woven from shared laughter, fleeting touches, and the subtle warmth of her presence. One rainy afternoon, we found ourselves under the same cafe awning, waiting for the downpour to ease. The street shimmered with reflections of neon signs and wet pavement. She tucked her chin slightly into her scarf, shivering from the chill, and I instinctively stepped closer, offering my coat. Her hand brushed mine as she took it, and the fleeting contact left an echo on my skin, a warmth that lingered long after. We fell into easy conversation, voices low over the sound of rain. The topics were trivial: books, music, a local bakery, but the closeness made every word feel heavier, more intimate. I noticed how she leaned slightly toward me when she laughed, the soft tilt of her head, the way her eyes lingered on mine just a fraction longer than necessary. I caught myself brushing a strand of hair from her face almost unconsciously, my fingers grazing her cheek. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let the touch linger for a heartbeat, her gaze meeting mine with something unspoken. It was in these quiet moments that the tension became palpable. A casual touch, a hand briefly resting on my arm, knees brushing under a shared bench, felt electric. There was a strange, thrilling awareness of proximity, a desire to linger just a little longer in each other's space, to let a hand remain an instant too long, a glance hold a second too much. Yet there was restraint, a mutual acknowledgement that some boundaries, however invisible, needed to remain intact. Even in her silences, the tension spoke. The way she would tilt her shoulder toward me while describing a story, the way her fingers lingered near mine on the table, or how she would catch my gaze mid-sentence, and hold it just long enough to make my heart stutter. Each of these small gestures felt deliberate yet unspoken, a language of its own, signaling curiosity and attraction without words. Internally, I wrestled with the intensity of my feelings. I admired her confidence, the quiet wisdom in her laughter, the graceful way she navigated the world, but I also feared overstepping, misreading cues, or being seen as presumptuous. And yet, the magnetic pull between us was undeniable, drawing me closer even when my mind reminded me to maintain distance. By the time the rain eased, we parted with a subtle brush of hands, fingers grazing briefly before she walked away. I stood there for a moment, feeling the warmth of that small contact lingering like a quiet ember in my chest. That night, replaying the encounter, I realized that our connection had deepened, not just through words, but through these delicate, charged moments of proximity. Every glance, every touch, every pause was a conversation of its own, speaking of curiosity, desire, and the tentative stirrings of something more. And as I drifted to sleep, I couldn't help but anticipate the next time our paths would cross, knowing that each encounter would bring us closer, not just physically, but emotionally, into a delicate dance of subtle affection and quiet longing. It happened on one of those evenings that felt suspended in time, the kind where the city hums softly under streetlights, and the ordinary seems impossibly vivid. We had decided to walk together after a casual meet-up at a mutual friend's gallery opening. The night air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain from earlier, mingled with the earthy aroma of fallen leaves. Our conversation had drifted from trivial topics, favorite artists, the quirks of city life, into more personal terrain, and I could feel the unspoken tension thickening between us with each step. At a quiet intersection, we stopped under a flickering street lamp, the world reduced to the soft glow and the occasional hum of passing cars. She tucked her hands into her coat pockets, but her shoulder nudged slightly against mine. I felt a sudden, surprising warmth from that simple contact, as if a current had passed through me. My heart thudded, not out of fear but anticipation, the thrill of proximity and the unspoken potential hanging between us. For a long moment neither of us spoke. I wanted to bridge the gap, to reach out, but my mind hesitated, tangled in questions of propriety, the age difference, the world outside that might never understand. And then she spoke quietly, almost vulnerable. "I'm glad you're here. I don't usually feel this comfortable with people." Her words struck me like a gentle confession. I realized that our connection had quietly deepened beyond casual familiarity. I extended my hand instinctively, and she hesitated for a heartbeat before letting hers rest atop mine. The sensation was electric yet grounding, a mix of reassurance, curiosity, and an undeniable pull. Her fingers pressed lightly against mine, warm and steady, and for the first time, the tension between us felt tangible, a bridge connecting our hesitant hearts. As we stood there, the world around us blurred into insignificance. I noticed every detail: the way her eyes searched mine for understanding, the subtle tremor in her voice, the faint shiver as her hand rested against mine. I found myself leaning slightly closer, drawn by the quiet gravity of this moment. She mirrored me, a silent acknowledgement of the closeness we were allowing ourselves, just enough to feel intimate without overstepping boundaries. The air between us seemed charged, not with urgency, but with something deeper, a recognition that we were stepping into territory neither of us had fully named. Our shoulders brushed again as we shifted, accidental yet deliberate, and I realized that every hesitation, every subtle glance and touch, had been building to this moment. We were standing on the cusp of something significant, both terrified and exhilarated by the unspoken potential. When we finally resumed walking, our hands parted reluctantly, each step echoing the quiet longing that had settled between us. The night had changed something in both of us, a recognition of mutual desire, tempered by restraint, that made the ordinary act of walking together feel like an intimate dance. I left that evening acutely aware that our connection had shifted irrevocably, no longer just curiosity or comfort, but a slow-burning tension that demanded honesty, attention, and courage to navigate. It was a quiet evening, one of those rare moments when the city seemed to pause just for us. We had ended up at a small, dimly lit park, the benches worn smooth by years of visitors, the air carrying the faint scent of blooming flowers and damp earth. A gentle breeze ruffled her hair, and I instinctively reached forward, brushing a stray strand behind her ear. The touch lingered just long enough for both of us to feel it, a subtle acknowledgement of the closeness we had been nurturing over weeks. We sat together, shoulders almost touching, letting the silence settle between us. It wasn't uncomfortable, on the contrary, it felt like a safe cocoon, a space where words could be soft, honest, and unhurried. I glanced at her, noticing the slight tension in her hands and the warmth in her eyes. There was a vulnerability there that mirrored my own, a quiet admission that we had both been holding back. Finally, she spoke, her voice low but steady. "I've been thinking about us. About these moments we share. And I realize, I care about you more than I expected." Her hand brushed against mine again, deliberate this time, fingers intertwining briefly. The warmth of her skin, the steady beat of her pulse under my touch, made my chest tighten with a mixture of relief and awe. I exhaled slowly, my own words tumbling out before fear could stop them. "I care about you too. I've tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself that it's just comfort or coincidence. But it's more than that. It's you. It's everything about you." There was a pause, not awkward, but heavy with the weight of truth finally spoken. I watched her shoulders relax slightly, a soft smile brushing her lips, and in that instant, the unspoken tension between us shifted. It was no longer tentative or hesitant, it had become acknowledgement, recognition of mutual feeling. We talked then, slowly, honestly, about the boundaries we wanted to maintain, about the world outside that might question our connection, and about the importance of trust and respect. Her hand remained in mine, a quiet anchor through every vulnerable admission. She leaned her head slightly toward me, the faint brush of her hair against my shoulder sending an involuntary shiver down my spine. But it wasn't desire alone, it was intimacy, closeness, and comfort all entwined. The more we spoke, the more I realized how profoundly our connection had grown. It wasn't just attraction, it was understanding, empathy, and a shared acknowledgement of life's complexities. Each laugh, each pause, each gentle squeeze of the hand reinforced the bond that had been building quietly for weeks. The age difference, the societal expectations, they mattered less here, in this small, suspended world of ours, where honesty and care defined the rules. By the time we left the park, our fingers remained intertwined, our steps aligned as though our bodies had learned the rhythm before our words caught up. The confession wasn't the end, it was a beginning. A recognition that what we shared was real, delicate, and worth nurturing. And as we walked side by side into the soft glow of the streetlights, I realized that the slow-burn connection we had cultivated was finally allowed to breathe, blossom, and exist without pretense. The weeks that followed felt like a gentle unfolding, as if the world itself had adjusted to accommodate the quiet intimacy between us. We didn't rush, didn't feel the need to label everything or move faster than the pace that felt natural. Our connection had matured into something steady, comforting, and profoundly human, a rhythm of trust, shared laughter, and subtle gestures that carried more meaning than words ever could. One Sunday morning, I found her at the cafe where it had all begun. The sunlight spilled through the tall windows, painting golden stripes across the worn wooden floors. She was already seated, a book open in front of her, a steaming cup of tea beside her. When our eyes met, her smile was soft, warm, and entirely familiar, like a promise kept. I slid into the seat opposite her, and a small brush of her hand against mine as she handed me the menu sent a comforting warmth through my chest. We talked about everything and nothing, books, music, mundane city life, but every word carried a subtle weight of intimacy. I noticed the way she tilted her head when listening, the small quirk of her smile when she laughed, and the way her fingers occasionally brushed mine under the table, intentionally or not. These moments, simple on the surface, had become the threads that wove the fabric of our relationship. Later, we walked through the park, the autumn leaves crunching beneath our feet. The crisp air carried the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves, a reminder of the season's quiet transition. We walked side by side, shoulders brushing, fingers occasionally interlocking. Each touch was deliberate yet natural, a testament to the trust and understanding we had built. I felt her hand rest lightly on my arm as we paused to watch a flock of birds take flight, the warmth of her skin against mine grounding me in a way that words could never capture. For the first time, I realized how fully I had come to rely on her presence, not just for excitement or comfort, but for the subtle steadiness she brought to my life. She, too, seemed to find solace in our closeness, the quiet way she leaned her head slightly toward me, the gentle brush of her fingers against mine while sharing a story. There was no urgency, no pressure, just a mutual understanding that this bond, tender and deliberate, was enough. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting a warm amber glow across the park, we paused on a small bridge overlooking the water. I felt her hand slide into mine naturally, our fingers intertwining in a way that felt like coming home. She rested her head briefly against my shoulder, the weight gentle but affirming, and I could feel the rhythm of her heartbeat syncing subtly with mine. In that silence, I understood the depth of what we had built, a connection grounded in patience, honesty, and quiet affection. By the time we walked back toward the city streets, the world around us felt softer, warmer, as if acknowledging the intimacy we shared. Our steps were unhurried, hands still linked, hearts quietly aligned. It was the culmination of a slow-burn journey, a story of tentative glances, subtle touches, shared vulnerability, and mutual trust. And in that simple, unassuming closeness, we found a profound sense of completion, a gentle affirmation that love, in its quietest form, was entirely possible, entirely ours.